The hypersonic phase just started. Everything you've watched until now, the carrier groups, the diplomatic noise, the skirmishes, all of that was Iran clearing the path for its real strategic weapon. The path is now clear. This is not a regional escalation. It is the calculated termination of an entire era of assumed American military security. Over the course of this analysis, I will break down the causal chain, linking this one event to the fundamental security of your long-term wealth. But to understand why this missile is not just another weapon, you first need to understand the physics that make it architecturally unstoppable. This single weapon makes all current American and Israeli defense systems in the region obsolete. The reason is not political or tactical. It is rooted in two non-negotiable physical properties. First, there is the issue of speed. The Fattah missile travels at Mach 15, approximately 11,500 miles per hour. The legacy defense systems deployed to protect US assets, like the Patriot and THAAD, were engineered to counter threats in the Mach 5 to Mach 7 range. The intercept calculation is simple. They are fundamentally too slow. As Yuval Baseski, a vice president at Israel's Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, stated, to intercept an object moving at Mach 10, one would need a defense moving at Mach 30, which is impossible in the atmosphere due to friction. The Fattah is even faster. But speed, while impressive, is not the true system killer. The second property is what makes interception a physical impossibility: in-flight maneuverability. All modern missile defense is based on a core logic of predictive interception. The system calculates a predictable ballistic arc, like a thrown stone, and sends an interceptor to a point in space where the target will be. The Fattah does not fly in a predictable arc. It can change direction mid-flight. To understand the advantage, think of a quarterback throwing a pass. But imagine if the football itself could change direction mid-air to actively dodge the defender. That's what the Fattah does to an interceptor. The defender will always arrive at an empty patch of sky. This capability isn't propaganda. It is the technical outcome of combining extreme speed with maneuverability against a system designed for a slower, non-maneuvering target. The missile is, by its very architecture, unstoppable once it's in the air. This fact leads to the most critical question. If you can't stop the arrow in flight, the only winning move is to take out the archer before he can shoot, and America had every opportunity to do so. So how did Iran manage to deploy this unstoppable weapon right under the nose of the world's most powerful military? The answer is not in the technology, but in the strategy, a masterclass in deception that we will now dissect. This masterclass has a name, a blueprint we call the Hegemony Kill-Chain. This is the framework that separates strategic analysis from event reporting. What looked like chaotic, disparate attacks was, in fact, a perfectly executed three-phase campaign. Phase 1 was deplete. Iran initiated this by launching waves of cheap drones and simple cruise missiles. The objective was not to cause significant damage, but to force the United States and its allies to expend their finite and incredibly expensive interceptors. Forcing a multi-million-dollar Patriot missile to shoot down a $10,000 drone is not a tactical victory. It's a strategic attrition of the defender's arsenal. Once stockpiles were confirmed to be drained, Phase 2 began blind. Iran then targeted the critical eyes of the entire defense architecture. Satellite imagery from sources like CNN and Bloomberg confirmed the result. The complete destruction of the primary US THAAD ANTPY-2 radar system at Jordan's Muwafaq Salti Air Base. Without these advanced early warning systems, the entire network was degraded and fighting blind. Only then, after confirming defenses were depleted and blinded, did Iran proceed to Phase 3. Deploy. This is when the Fattah hypersonic missile was launched. The weapon that could not be stopped was only fired after Iran ensured there was nothing left that could even try to see it coming. This wasn't chaos, this was a blueprint, and they followed it perfectly. But this is where the physics of the battlefield collides with the architecture of the narrative. If this kill chain was so flawlessly executed, why do all official reports insist on minimal damage and no significant casualties? The answer is that alongside the kinetic conflict, a parallel information war is being waged, and the official Western narrative is collapsing under the weight of its own inconsistencies. Let's perform the intercept calculation on the three most critical points. First, the casualty reports. The official claim was minimal, single-digit casualties. The physics of a direct missile strike on a fully operational base, housing thousands of personnel, simply do not permit such an outcome. The data eventually corrects the narrative. Initial US reports of minimal casualties were later updated to confirm at least 6 soldiers killed, while Israeli sources reported figures closer to 11 or 12. Second, the narrative of degradation. We are told that Iran's missile capability is being degraded. The reality on the ground shows the opposite. A strategic escalation. Iran has just deployed its most advanced, previously reserved hypersonic weapons. This proves their campaign is proceeding on their timeline, not being weakened or deterred. Third, the infrastructure claims. The assertion was that allies destroyed 60% of Iranian missile infrastructure. If that were a factual input, the logical output would be a dramatic decrease in the rate of inbound fire. Instead, the fire has escalated, not just in volume, but in sophistication, culminating in the very hypersonic phase we just analysed. But these discrepancies, in casualties, in capability, in effectiveness, are merely the initial tremors. They are symptoms of a much larger structural failure. The real earthquake, the fundamental shift in the global architecture of power, is what this hegemony kill-chain has truly triggered. And it reveals a new strategic reality that will define the next decade. This new strategic reality, the earthquake triggered by the hegemony kill-chain, can be distilled down to a single, stark observation. Iran, a nation sanctioned and isolated for decades, is currently in a direct military conflict with the United States and Israel simultaneously. And it is winning, entirely alone. Consider the geopolitical landscape. Of the 57 Islamic nations in the world, not one is standing militarily alongside Iran. They are providing no troops, no air cover, no direct fire support. It is a solo engagement against a superpower and its primary regional proxy. Iran didn't need them. That is the sentence that changes global politics for the next 50 years. That is the signal that has been broadcast from the Middle East to every capital across the global south. Every nation that has felt the pressure of American power, every country weighing its options for the future, is watching this and running the same cold calculation. If a solo Iran can functionally neutralize American regional power projection, what is the actual value of a US military alliance? Does it provide a shield of protection, or does it simply paint a target on your back, turning your nation into a liability in a new era of warfare? The fallout isn't theoretical, it's already happening. According to analysis from sources like the Atlantic Council, this independent action is forcing a fundamental recalculation of the US alliance value proposition. We are seeing traditional Gulf allies who built their entire national security architecture on the bedrock of American protection now frantically working back channels to find an exit. Their strategic question has become, how do we ask America to leave without it looking like we're asking America to leave? The American military presence has inverted from a strategic asset to a dangerous liability. The evidence suggests Iran's solo success is redrawing the map of global power. Do you believe this marks the definitive end of American unipolarity, or is it a temporary setback the US will recover from? Share your strategic take in the comments below. But to conclude, that this is simply the end of American military hegemony is a dangerously incomplete analysis. Because the Hegemony Kill-Chain, by exposing the limitations of conventional military power, has just set the stage for America to unleash its real asymmetric weapon. A weapon far more powerful and far more devastating than any carrier group or stealth bomber. That weapon is not a missile. It is the US dollar and the architecture of control it provides over the global financial system. Think of it as two different games being played on the same board. The Fattah missile represents a victory in the game of hard power. A fast, spectacular, tactical engagement. But the US dollar allows America to play a different game entirely. A slow, grinding, strategic war of structural power that ultimately determines the outcome. This isn't theory, it's recorded history. When sanctions were reimposed after 2018, Iran's GDP, according to the IMF, contracted by 4.8% and then a staggering 9.5% the following year. Its oil exports, the lifeblood of its state, collapsed. World Bank data shows a drop from roughly 2.3 million barrels per day to under 500,000. That is a 75% reduction in the revenue needed to fund its state, its military, and the very research that produced the Fattah. This is the critical calculation. Iran may have solved the physics of missile flight, but America can impose an economic checkmate. While one battle plays out in the skies, a more decisive war is waged on bank ledgers. The physics of missile flight is one reality. The physics of global finance is another, more enduring one. But this clash of military and financial physics isn't just an abstract geopolitical problem. It creates a specific and quantifiable vector of threat and opportunity for your capital. To protect your wealth, you can't just follow the headlines. You must be able to model the exact financial physics of this new era. And that's precisely what we will break down next. This new architecture of risk presents two primary vectors for your capital: a clear threat and a parallel opportunity. Let's model them with precision. First, the threat. This is a global inflation shock, driven by the weaponization of oil. The conflict in the Gulf has already introduced a significant risk premium. Research from Goldman Sachs quantifies this initial premium at approximately $14 per barrel. However, serious financial models are now pricing in a trajectory toward $150 or even $200 per barrel if key transit choke points are contested. You must understand this is not merely a problem at the gas pump, it's an everything problem. A systemic input cost increase that cascades through every global supply chain, raising the price of every manufactured good and every agricultural product. It is a tax on global productivity. Second, the opportunity. This is a predictable, multi-year rearmament cycle. The demonstrated failure of legacy air defense systems against the hypersonic threat, the unstoppable weapon we analyzed, guarantees a surge in sovereign spending. We saw the immediate market reaction. As the conflict escalated, capital flowed into the defense sector, with Lockheed Martin rising 4%, Northrop Grumman 6%, and RTX 5% as the market priced in future orders. This is not short-term speculation. The conflict has exposed, as reported in publications like Air and Space Forces magazine, critical munitions sustainability limits. Interceptor stockpiles are being rapidly drained, which forces a policy-driven replenishment and production scaling cycle that will last for years. This translates to sustained tailwinds for major defence primes like Lockheed Martin and RTX, as well as their entire supply chains, which can be accessed through sector-specific ETFs like ITA or XAR. This creates a logical, policy-driven upside, allowing you to position your capital to hedge against the very instability that is generating the inflationary threat. So the old playbook, the one built on the foundation of assumed American military supremacy, is now operationally obsolete. The new playbook for any serious strategist or investor must account for a far more complex, multi-domain reality. The clearest way to structure this is with an I-end, but therefore framework. And Iran has proven it can achieve tactical military superiority in a localized conflict, shattering the myth of US invincibility. But the United States retains overwhelming, asymmetric power through its control of the global financial system. This allows it to wage a long-term economic war, a domain where it still dictates the rules of engagement. Therefore, we must prepare for a new era defined by this tension. You will see heightened military vulnerability, driving regional conflicts and inflation, alongside enduring US economic leverage, shaping the ultimate outcome. Understanding this dual reality is the key to seeing past the headlines and making sound strategic decisions to protect your wealth. If you found value in this breakdown, subscribe and activate notifications. We are dedicated to providing you not just information, but the strategic frameworks required to navigate what comes next.